So one of the rewards for the Kickstarter folks was that Ben and I would answer 4 questions from all of you. And I asked all of you to put your questions on Facebook, and we got several good ones. I also put it on Kickstarter for those who don't use Facebook, and we got a few through there too. And Ben and I picked 4 of those questions, and we're going to answer those now.
We're going to start with Jason Deros, who asks, what were some of the largest obstacles in the writing process for both of you? Ben writing guitars and such after John had written drums, for example. Also, every band member has struggles exposing their view and what they're bringing to the table. What would be a good example of a struggle you two had to fight, debate, communicate, and overcome in the writing process? So it's a good question, but I'm not sure it applies to Portraits because there wasn't one moment where I can't remember disagreeing with John ever.
So, surprisingly, Ben and I didn't have any conflicts, hardly any conflicts, no major conflicts for sure, and rarely ever did we even disagree on things, which is rare because musicians notoriously have very fragile feelings. But I think it came from kind of mutual respect on from both of us for the other person. I really respect Ben's musicianship and songwriting abilities, and it was seamless. The only difficulty, the hurdle that we had, I think, was just working on 2 different continents and communicating through Skype and not being able to sit down together in the same room.
I'm playing in a band with John Williams, who's pretty good at hitting things really loudly, better than I am at hitting things loudly. And with musicians who are better than me in certain fields, I tend to let them get on with it because it's John Williams on the drums. So I don't really feel I have a right to have much of an opinion in that land, and definitely didn't need an opinion in that land because it was perfect.
I was amazed. Typically, the songwriting comes from the guitarist, the vocalist, which Ben is doing, and he's writing all of the melodies, obviously. But given that upside down nature of how we are recording and writing the music, and that I write the drums and create a song template first, that kind of made the drums integral to the songwriting process. And I think Ben is uniquely open to all kinds of madness and drumming. I think a lot of other musicians would have been scared away especially by some of those crazy original elements that I sent to him, some fills that were just over the top. Yeah, so there was no real hurdles to overcome. There were no real ego clashes in the whole songwriting process. So it's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful project to work with.
But I don't remember there being anything. There were just ideas. Like, it wasn't like, oh, this bit's horrible, or I don't like you, or what you've done to my music. But it was like, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. It was, I guess, back in the formulation of the songs, which is really done on John's end, that was the time where some of that would have happened, but I don't remember anything happening like that. What were the largest obstacles in the writing process? Just distance, purely distance. It's really hard work. Long distance relationships are really hard work, and especially when you're trying to write a record together. But yeah, it's just there was no obstacle at all, and any of those obstacles like distance, we overcame those with your help. Without you literally removed those obstacles. So that's why we appreciate you so much.
So the next person was Peter Brett, who asked, how did you and Ben meet, and how did the initial writing start?
I met John online quite a few years ago now. I don't know when, but actually he was in line to be the drummer on the Two Lost Boys.
So I started, messing around, coming up with ideas for drum parts for those songs. And then we kind of fell out of communication. I kind of fell off the face of the earth for a while. I ended up taking a job transfer, going out of Colorado to Cincinnati. I was working in an on-office job and not able to set up my drums. And during that time when I wasn't communicating, Ben found another drummer to complete that album, and he recorded that album. As soon as I got back to Colorado, I messaged Ben, and he was happy to hear from me.
But instead, we worked on something that we called Portraits, and some crazy songs started happening, and from that, From 4.28 was born.
Ben originally had an idea for portraits. He wanted to start a new project. He didn't know how it was going to be available, and his idea was to create a portrait of scientists or some sort of major achievements in the past for each, and use that as the topic for each song. And obviously that was right up my alley in terms of subject matter, and then it took off from there.
Brendan Walker asks, have you thought about the concept of doing a live playthrough of the album, and how would that be possible? Yeah, I think about it a lot. There's actually some like online, there's ways of playing online, which I don't think I've spoken to John about yet, but there are ways of playing together online that are really appealing. But that's not really live. I guess it is live, but it's not what you think of as live.
I haven't brought it up to Ben yet, but I had an idea a couple of weeks ago of potentially using some kind of app. I know that they make a few apps that you can play with each other in separate locations, and it syncs up and doesn't have much latency. So presumably you can play live together, and you can record it as well. So I think that would be a really cool thing for us to set up a recording and play through these songs live. And yeah, it would be difficult to do because there are two of us, but Ben is fully capable of playing all of those crazy guitar parts and singing simultaneously. He purposefully wrote the song so that he could do that. And, I could play the drums live, obviously, as well. So that would be a really cool experiment and effort.
Yeah, it would be great to do like a mini tour or something like that. John has had experience playing live in bands before. I still do, so it's something that's really fresh to me. I love playing live, and portraits probably be the most challenging thing I could play live, but it would be such an amazing thing to do. And maybe a short run of dates would be ideal, but I think it would be great. Just kind of relatively small venues, small crowds, in some intimate events would be really, really interesting to do. And I think the songs would translate really well to live versions. The only thing we need to do is line up a bassist, because although the songs can be played without a bass, and they were originally written without bass, I think it would be better with a bassist potentially live.
I saw a few others that Anthony Verdier also expounded on that and asked if we could do a tour. We don't have a major label right now. We're going through Ben's label, Hurt Records, and both of us have families, so it'd have to be kind of something on a smaller scale, not a massive, prolonged tour with tour buses, etc. But that's something absolutely that we're both interested in, and we'd love to be able to meet some of you guys personally, and play for live crowds as well. So someday, hopefully, we'll go do some tours, either a few shows or maybe more than a few, who knows.
Evan Smith asks, what topic covered on the album did you find the most interesting to research, and why? Now, this isn't really a question that I can answer, because the majority of the research was done on John's. It sounds so strange me saying research. That's such a John thing that it's hard for me to. The only thing I will say is that From 4.28, I brought that idea to the table purely because I was reading a book at the time that literally uncovered this idea of deep time, and I thought it was a really interesting idea, and John happened to know a whole shitload about it. So as soon as I brought that to the table, he was able to fill in 80% of the blanks that I didn't know, and from there we were able to bring some quite profound lyrics to the table. There's a really interesting kind of backstory to Hudson, and he was ostracized religiously, and there's a whole plane of understanding behind it that I didn't really understand at the time, because I just knew of him discovering this idea of deep time, and it was so anti the etiquette of the time that it was a really big deal for the scientific community. And from there, I got this idea of why isn't each song tailor-made to cover a specific scientific topic? And then John populated those songs with incredible amount of research that went into each of them, and I can't take any credit for that because it was just him. Yeah, so I'm sure he's got more to say than I have.
That's a really good question, and there are 12 songs and on the album and 12 areas of research. And I think what I found the most interesting wasn't just one of the individual topics being more interesting than the others, but kind of tying together all 12 in a kind of a cohesive fashion. Another aspect that I really loved on the research is that we're doing scientific topics, which I'm used to researching for my job as an archaeologist. But what I found really compelling and fun about this album is that I didn't have to do it in such a scientific sense. There wasn't such a rigid, objective, peer-reviewed article writing sort of thing that I'm so used to doing. It was more creative and imaginative. For example, one of our songs deals with the Rhind mathematical papyrus, which is the earliest mathematical document in the world. This papyrus in the second intermediate period in Egypt, some 3,000 years ago. And it was written by a scribe who he's recording all known knowledge, and he goes on to expound on mathematical formula that deal with kind of a precursor to Pythagorean theorem, and they were able to obviously calculate the volume of pyramids, which they serve as their tombs, and all of this, really amazing knowledge for that early, and instead of just writing about it in a purely empirical sense and a scientific sense, we changed the story to be, the scribe, and we're using some creative license as well in the story, and talking about how, he's worried that these new rulers who were ruling over Egypt during the second intermediate period, the Hyksos, who came in from the Levant area and took over the Nile Delta, he's worried that they were going to diminish all of the knowledge that they had accumulated, and he was wanting to record this for posterity's sake. And that was our creative licensing there. But it was just really fun for me to deal with topics that I love as an archaeologist, and also kind of use those and research those in a creative sense as well.
Bastic asks, what was the most challenging part that arose during the production of the album? I'd say for me it was the guitar, which is such a strange thing to say because it's my instrument, like it's the one I love, and helped build the guitar that I used to track Portrait. So I actually use 3 guitars to track Portrait. So there's a one that's made of metal, which is the one I helped create. There is one, there's a PRS custom shop that I use, and there is the Portrait guitar, like the cream guitar as well. So all 3 of those were all used in the tracking of the record, just for a bit of variety, basically. And they all do certain things slightly better than the other, if you know what I mean. They all have their strengths. But the tuning of the guitar was a real issue because it was something that I'd never worked with. I didn't want a standard tuning, and I never thought that I would go through the record kind of in standard tuning or in a kind of drop tuning or anything like that. I wanted it to be very, very different, and it was very, very different. And it meant I had to kind of learn how to play guitar theoretically again. In terms of the theory of guitar, I needed to learn from the ground up, which was an amazing experience. Relearning the instrument you love, it's just so fun, and I think some really interesting sounds came out of that process, because it sounds like a really kind of pointless task to find a new tuning and install that on a record, but actually it takes you down avenues that you would likely not bother with if you were playing in a kind of more in a tuning that made more sense to you. I think you would it would keep me in my comfort zone too much, whereas this tuning just completely took the comfort zone and buried it alive. So I'm gonna have to dig it up for some projects coming up though. But for Portraits, I'm very happy that it was dead. But that's the most challenging thing for me.
It was a long process. Obviously, we're now a year into after being in the studio. We were in the studio 1 year ago in December in England, and now here we are releasing the album 1 year later, exactly 1 year later. So during that year, there was a lot of work being done on both of our ends. I think the most challenging thing was that it's just two of us, you know, and the album itself is so ambitious. You know, we have guitars and bass and drums and percussion, and Ben played a plethora of other instruments, you know, dulcimer, you know, tons and tons of stuff, a viola, and I did the initial mixing of the drums, all of the stems, I think there were 23 mics or something, all of those stems were sent to me, and I tried to mix them all and get it sounding kind of how I like it. And then the really challenging part, I think, was when we were doing the preliminary mixing. Tim Morris was the engineer who recorded it, and he did the preliminary mixing. And just trying to get that initial song. The first song that we sent to Tim was, I think it was Antikythera Mechanism. Yeah, it was. And we just had such a hard time coming to, you know, just between the three of us, trying to get the sound that we wanted on the album as a whole with that first song. And largely the hurdles were my fault. I put too many effects on my initial drum stems I sent to Tim, and I had to back down some of the compression that I was using, etc., so he could work his magic. He's obviously a better mixer than I am. So just overcoming those hurdles originally with the first song, and once we overcame that hurdle, it was fairly smooth sailing to get the rest mixed. And then obviously once they were all mixed to our liking, we sent them off to get mastered at Abbey Road Studios. And even the mastering process is just such a crazy album. Even the mastering process, you know, we went through several iterations of that, and the mastering engineer had a tough time with it as well. But obviously the end result we're all happy with. Let's see. Joel Parr also writes, when is the process of writing? When is the process of writing? Did you intend the album to be a loop? When in the process of writing, did you intend for the album to be a loop? Ben actually came up with that idea, and it was right around, I'd say it's sort of the 6th or 7th, maybe 8th song that we were writing, that Ben brought up this idea. So I had that idea in mind as I was writing the drum template for the last song, which obviously overlaps into the first song. So you know, that was fun and difficult. That was another challenge that I didn't really bring up, trying to loop it and do it in a cohesive way where the loop sounds good, and also in a way where each of the songs that are looped sound good individually. And regardless of how hard you try to do that, the last song on the album that loops into the first song is going to end abruptly. But there's just no way to do a loop in a fashion that makes the last song end in the most satisfactory way for everybody. So there's going to be a little bit of jarriness if you listen to the last song and don't loop it to the first one. But we're very happy with that decision, and a lot of people have already messaged me and said that, you know, they listened to the album and they didn't even realize when it looped, and then suddenly they were hearing songs again that they you know, heard the first listen, and that's exactly what we intended for to happen. So Connor Whalen writes, which songs, if any, made you lose your shit in frustration when recording? Oh, for me, it was Man Makes Himself. That one, if you've heard it, it's just insanity on the drums. First of all, it starts off in 13/8 time signature, which is odd, really odd, hard, and all my fault. You know, that was me that created the original rhythm that translated to 13/8. And then the 13/8 intro morphs into 4/4, and the majority of the song is 4/4, and then the end goes back into 13/8. But even the 4/4 is just this mad, crazy drum part all over the toms. I'm doing crossovers with the hi-hats, and I remember I had practiced it enough at home, and then we got to the studio, and it was just like, why did I create this this drum part, this verse? Why did I have to make it so difficult on myself? But we've got a lot of good feedback for that song, Man Makes Himself, and you know, it is kind of it screws with your mind to listen to it, but I think the end result turned out great. So Fiction Serrano writes, do you guys have any advice for upcoming artists? And can we get the music sheets so we can try playing some of the songs ourselves? I would say find somebody that has, or other bandmates that have a similar personality as yourself. Both Ben and I are, neither one of us are the kind of people that really like to impose our will on other people, and we're very respectful of others. And that really greased the skids for the production of the album. You know, this is such an ambitious project that if one or the other of us were too eager to make it how we wanted it at the expense of the other, then I think it would have never been completed, you know, particularly just between the two of us. So the more band members you add to the band as well, the more potential there is for conflict. What else? Joe Pierce asks, could you tell us what tuning the album is in? I can't tell you that. I'm not sure. Ben, I remember, did some kind of odd, very, very odd tuning. I cannot remember. I can't remember exactly what it was.
I thought I was going to be able to take this secret to the grave, but the Portrait's tuning on guitar is A sharp, F, C sharp, D, F, G sharp. So it's a really weird one, but really interesting. You have those two notes down the bottom, the A sharp and F. They're really useful because you can still play kind of the more riffy elements of the songs, and I use those two strings to play the riffy stuff. Because I'm doing such two-handed, a lot of two-handed play on Portraits. What's really nice of the up strings is that you can harmonize really easily just using one set of strings, so I can get an almost kind of sitar-y effect by having either a string being strung as your residual string, so it's constantly droning, or playing two strings together would always work out in a seventh or a fifth harmony, depending on where you are. Depending if you change your fingers, obviously, as well. But the really weird thing about this tuning, and I was sat on the floor in a hotel coming up with this tuning probably 2 years ago, right before we wrote From 4.28, actually. I was sitting on the floor of a hotel, and I'd been drinking water, lots and lots and lots of water, and it got me into this place that I didn't know I could get to. Anyway, I was drinking a hell of a lot of water, and I started just detuning the guitar because I was just playing things in my comfort zone. So I kept detuning the guitar again and again and again and again, and up-tuning certain things. So I got to this place that was really weird. Originally I thought it was like a bouzouki because it played like a bouzouki does, but it's not. It has that Middle Eastern twang when you're playing scales, because immediately when you play a scale, your chromatics sound like Egyptian scales, which is odd anyway, so you're immediately put into a strange mind. But the really interesting thing is that your C shape, if you play C on a guitar, so your C major, minor, or harmonic shape, it works, but it's not a C. So it works as, I don't even know what the chord is when you play it on C. I can't figure it out quick enough. It would be an F. It would be diminished. I think it would be an F. Whatever it is, it's going to be diminished. But it works really well. Like, suddenly you're playing a relatively simple chord shape, but you're getting a really extravagant chord out of it. And it doesn't always work, obviously, but there's a song called Man Makes Himself, and the chorus in that song is almost entirely C-shaped chords. Really weird. I don't know. I completely lucked out. That was not me being a genius or anything like that. It was just, I was very, very thirsty, and so I drank a lot of water. And suddenly I had a magical tuning appeared, and I ran with it. So there you go. There's the secret formula to not being able to play any of the Portrait songs, because I find it hard to play the Portrait songs, because the other thing with the Portraits guitar really quickly is that I'm the only guitarist and I'm the lead guitarist, but I have to play rhythm as well. So I'm writing guitar parts that are both rhythm parts, but are interesting enough that you could consider them lead parts. And if you listen to the record, you're hearing kind of divided guitars, but all of them are being played at once. So if I played it live, you'd be hearing all of those things at once. So at times, all five, or most of the time, all five of my left hand fingers, including the thumb, which is playing the lowest notes, are all being utilised, and my right hand is being utilised at the same time. It's like torture. It's like mental torture, and I've got to sing at the same time. It's really good fun, and it was a real painstaking process writing the Portraits guitar stuff, but oh man, do I love it. And I cannot wait to play it live. It's going to be really good fun. So there you go, that's the secret sauce and the Portraits tuning.
Xavier Marty asks, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? You know, I've never had the patience to not bite a Tootsie Pop, so I couldn't tell you. Although I'm sure somebody online has figured it out. Actually, let's Google it and see. How many licks does it take? So it immediately popped up on Google. A group of engineering students from Purdue University reported that its licking machine, modeled after a human tongue, took on average 364 licks to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop. So there you go. That's horrifying to think that there is a licking machine out there modeled after a human tongue. Daniel Claridge asks, what is the guiltiest pleasure in relation to a singer or band? What are our guilty pleasures? I can tell you my guilty pleasure, and Ben knows this very well from our recording experience. Chocolate-covered hobnobs, these little dietary biscuits, as they call them in England. Those were my guilty pleasure. I probably went through a dozen packages of those all by myself. So I'd have a little pile of hobnobs and some tea, sitting beside my drums and sipping on tea and eating hobnobs the entire time. Kept me going. You burn a lot of calories when you're drumming 12 hours a day. So James Ward, last question. During the recording of the album, was there any interesting method to get unique sounds specifically made for the album? Also, did you use any interesting or unusual instruments during the recording of this album, apart from the normal, such as the guitar, the drums, etc.? On my end, I recorded a lot of percussion in the studio. I used mallets and did cymbal swells, and we got creative and tuned the big floor toms into timpanis, and a lot of shakers. And I also recorded individual hits on all the percussion, including the shakers and the rattles, just so we'd have that collection, and I could use that as programmed layers onto the percussion, onto the string interludes, for example, and that worked out well. Ben just did a whole host of additional instruments. All right, well, that is all of the questions, so thanks for submitting those questions. It's just been a pleasure interacting with all of you Kickstarter folks and friends and everybody else who are on these forums and providing feedback. So Brendan, you were very kind to write what you thought of the songs as you were listening to the album for the first time, because Ben and I were so involved in this album from the very beginning, and now for over a year. It's hard for us to step back and kind of listen to the album as we would had we not been so involved with it, how you would listen to it. So it's been great for us to hear this feedback. So thanks again for your support, and thanks for sending in your questions, and hopefully we answered those burning questions that you've had now for over a year. Take care.
So I just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone who supported the Kickstarter campaign, because we literally couldn't have done it without you guys. You guys are amazing, and you literally helped us create our debut record. I mean, it's a really big deal, and we couldn't have done it without you. And I look forward to doing one of these again, hopefully one day, and I hope the rewards find you well. And you deserve so much more than what you're going to get, but it's just a small token of our appreciation, and we absolutely love you for helping us create our first record. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy Monad, which is coming out midnight tonight, but you're getting it anyway because you're amazing and you're the Kickstarter guys. Thank you. Bye.